Welcome to Carpervert. I'm Jonny Smith, and a bit of an odd one today, sort of bittersweet. Exciting because the Dodge, this Charger of mine, has come out of its hibernation, ready for spring, summer 2018, which is great, and it works. A few little jobs to do, as is always the way, but it's kind of half the fun when you're riding an old car. But today's MOT day, and if I'd left it in the shed for about 15 more days, this car wouldn't legally have to have an MOT. Those of you who don't live in the UK, an MOT is something, an annual test, a health check for the car to make sure it's legal to be on the road. Suspension, brakes, lights, that kind of thing. Today, I'm going to take it for an MOT because this could be the last ever MOT it has. I don't think it's a good idea that the government have decided to exempt cars over 40 years old for MOTs, because it's a good time to actually familiarise yourself with your car. Have a look at what needs doing. These are all old cars. Sometimes you can't tell what jobs need doing. You need a second opinion. That's my opinion. It's great to hear the Quartz exhaust on it again. I've got it on loud. Then if I press my remote control to number 1, it's a bit more sensible. But I don't want it sensible, I want it like that. I realised that it is 10 years to the month since I first bought this 68 Charger of mine. So we've been together for a decade, and when I got it, it hadn't been on the road since the early 90s, I think. And it's kind of a part of the family now. Just one of the most enjoyable cars I've ever owned to drive, to enjoy, because you don't have to worry about the paint. I always bought this car knowing that I wasn't going to paint it. There were a few places I'd have to paint, but I wanted to try and preserve some of that weathered patina, patinated look. I've had a few people try and buy this car off me in the past, and once or twice I thought, well, the money will be good to put towards the house, sensible family stuff. I've always resisted. And credit to my wife, Chops, she said, oh, you really like that car, you should keep that car. Heading to the MOT station. I book an MOT station that's quite a long way away from my house, not for convenience whatsoever, because it isn't, but because I like having a bit of a drive out to the MOT station, get the car warmed up properly, check its brakes, check its steering, and to sort of re-familiarise yourself with it. You might have seen my previous MOT video of this car when it had the standard exhaust on it. Of course, now it's got the Quartz exhaust, the switchable active exhaust. And even on standard exhaust manifolds, it sounds gorgeous. And you've got that switchability, so it can be a little bit more sensible if you want it to be. Speedo's now working since I had the exhaust done. Horn works. Yeah. Must align the steering wheel. That's a real annoyance, and I know a lot of people who have seen the previous YouTube video have pointed out it is irritating having a steering wheel that isn't completely right.
Right, we're at the MOT station now, so let's get on with what this video is about. This video is about classic cars in Britain of more than 40 years old from May the 20th, no longer needing an MOT. And here's 10 things you need to know about that, because it is a little bit of a minefield. 1. Whereas before only cars first registered before 1960 were exempt from needing an MOT, the new rules apply to any car first registered more than 40 years ago, with a couple of exceptions. That means that most cars first registered before the 20th of May 1978 will no longer need an MOT. What's more, the 40 years rule is a rolling date. Number 2, as always with these things, there's a few exceptions. In fact, there's quite a few of them. The main one, which created a fair bit of confusion when these changes were first announced, is that the 40-year-old rule does not apply if the vehicle has been substantially changed in the past 30 years. So what does that really mean? What constitutes a substantial change? Well, the government like to clarify this issue. In short, the rules state that substantially changed refers to the technical characteristics of the main components being altered, where the main components are chassis and monocoque body shell changes, axles and running gear, specifically alterations of the type and method of suspension or steering, engine changes, although merely changing the cubic capacities of the same basic engine should be okay. Number 3. To further complicate matters, the substantial changes rule are themselves subject to a lot of sub-clauses. In other words, they don't apply if the changes were made to preserve a vehicle where original parts are no longer available, the changes were made when vehicles of the type were in production or in general use within 10 years of the end of production, or changes were made to axles and running gear in order to improve efficiency, safety, or environmental performance. You can interpret that any way you want. Number 4. Certain other types of vehicle are not exempt even if they haven't been substantially changed. Yes, this is getting a bit confusing, but bear with me. There are several of these, but the most common will be commercial vehicles, in other words, goods vehicles with a maximum laden weight of more than 3.5 tonnes, and buses, in other words, vehicles with 8 or more seats, that are used commercially but will not be exempted from periodic testing at 40 years. But you probably don't care about that. Vehicles that are still in production are not exempt either, although I can't for the life of me think of many models that have been in consistent production for more than 40 years. Can you? Cars and motorbikes with a Q reg will also need to be tested, the dreaded Q plate leprosy, as my brother calls it. As will kit cars assembled from different makes and models, or kit conversions that add new parts to old and reconstructed classic vehicles. However, in each of these 4 cases, if your vehicle is taxed as a historic vehicle and hasn't been substantially modified in the past 30 years, it can still be considered to be a vehicle of historic interest. This is confusing, isn't it? Number 5. Classic cars which didn't need to be MOT tested before may now need to be. Yeah, weird. Given that so many more cars now won't need to be tested, estimates put the figure at nearly 300,000 in the UK, there are some older vehicles that will now fall foul of the regs. Until the 20th of May changes, most cars first registered before 1960 were exempt from the MOT laws. After the 20th of May, the substantially changed rules will apply. So in other words, if you own a Ford Popular that's got a Chevy V8 and a Ford 9-inch back axle in it, you'll now need to MOT it to be able to drive it on the public roads. It's obvious. Number 6. It's obvious, but even if you didn't need an MOT, you will still need to keep the car in good nick. The rules clearly state that you still are obligated to keep the vehicle in roadworthy condition. They also suggest that you can voluntarily get the car tested, and that's something I advise unless you really know what you're doing. And even then, what's wrong with a second opinion? Number 7. To get exemption from the MOT, you will need to register as a vehicle of historic interest. That's the VHI. Vehicle of Historic Interest. When taxing your car, you'll need to declare that it's exempt from the MOT process and confirm it hasn't been substantially altered in the past 30 years. You will also need to have registered it as a VHI, which you can do at a post office by completing a form called the V112 declaration form. That's the V112. If it's not registered as a VHI or has been substantially changed, you'll still need to MOT it to keep driving it. Number 8. Not everyone is a fan of these new rules. So why are these changes actually happening? It's ultimately down to the Department for Transport, who say that historic vehicles are generally well maintained and used mostly for short journeys, and that the modern MOT is no longer relevant to cars over 40 years old. And I kind of see their point there, but clearly many people in the classic car world don't agree. Said Department for Transport consulted with 2,141 individuals, clubs, trade bodies and businesses before making this decision. And you know what? Of those, just 899 were in favour of extending the exemptions, with 1,130 opposed. Number 9. There are plenty of other MOT changes coming into effect. This is one of the biggest overhauls of the MOT process for years, with changes that will affect every car on the road. The exemptions for classic cars are among the biggest differences from the previous regulations, but every driver, however old their vehicle, should be aware of the new rules. Number 10. Most of the changes are to comply with EU laws. Regardless of where you stand on the whole Brexit thing, it's a fact that right now the UK remains a part of the EU, and that means we have to comply with EU Directive 2014/45, which came into force from 20th of May 2018. Not only does the government receive substantial fines for failing to comply, but drivers without an EU compliant MOT might not be allowed into other EU countries. So if you want the full intel, go check out the government's full guide to changes on their website. It's on the screen now. My advice, just pay a trusted garage for an hour of their time every year to stick your car on their ramp and check it out thoroughly. It's good for the car's health, which means surely it's better for the owners.
Well then, MOT. Ta-da! I have an MOT certificate, and this could be the last one this car gets. It doesn't need to have another one, but I'm probably going to give it one. There it is. Got a couple of advisories. Wheel bearing needs nipping up on this side, just tightening a bit. The brake hose, the line that goes over the back axle, it's just started to get a bit flaky, so I'm going to remedy those problems ASAP. Have a look at this wiper motor, which has had a bit of an intermittent issue. I quite like knowing where I stand with the car. Do I think MOTs are a good idea? Yeah, I do. But you know what? Just getting this MOT and talking to my MOT man, Ed, I said to him, well, he pointed something else out. He said, remember, if a car fails an MOT, it's a failure. Even if you didn't need to take a car for an MOT, it's logged. You can't escape that. So I thought to myself, well, maybe these companies, garages, should offer a health check that's not an official MOT where you log onto a database and you scrutinise it, but it's half an hour of a garage's time and an MOT tester's time, put it up on the ramps and have a good look around the car. Maybe charge a different amount of money. I think that would be a really, really good thing to do. So any garages listening, maybe it's something we should consider in the classic car world.